And another thing that comes into play, too, would be how heavily wooded or how many trees are on the lot. Are those trees in the footprint of the new build? Mm-hmm. And if so, what's the clearing? And you want to also make sure that you have good coverage in case you're a deer hunter, right?
Correct, yeah. You want to make sure you leave tree stand trees in place, yes.
We build on some very heavily wooded large lots, and you kind of stake your claim to the homeowner that you're going to become their best friend because you want access to the property. So I give you trouble about that.
Absolutely, fringe benefit.
Welcome to the Art of Custom from Hibbs Homes. In this episode, Director of Construction Chris Pedigo joins us once again to share his expertise on what keeps your home solid. The foundation. We start from the ground up by discussing the lot itself and cover everything that goes into the base of your home. Enjoy.
Today, we're talking about foundations, but let me stop you for just a second. Before you brace yourself for a half hour of bad puns, don't worry. As Melody was writing this episode, she determined that foundation puns were beneath her.
Womp womp.
You promised no more puns, and then I had to deliver one.
I'm sure there's going to be a couple to come. They're not going to come from me. I assure you that, dear listener.
You're right. And then you also have me reading, and she swears the puns officially stop there.
Yes.
That's not accurate, though.
I know. And I can't control what happens.
You know, again, you've done a really good job of kind of coming up with our topics this season. Your foundation, solid as a rock. Tell us how you came up with this idea.
Well, we've been talking a lot about the structure of the house. I know we had a season where we got to go through each of the design elements, and I didn't feel like we really talked about the materials enough. And when we got through some of those big components like the thermal envelope, it occurred to me that when you get your foundation in the ground, that seems like the simplest, but it's not. It's not the simplest part of the process, and there's a lot that goes into it. And sometimes that can be a huge letdown, I think, for clients, too, when they look and see the footprint. There's an optical illusion.
Yeah.
And so sometimes they'll look down and think, wow, that's what we've been working on this whole time.
That's our house. We're paying how much for this?
Right.
Because it looks small.
It does. It does. And the other component is that it seems so plain, but there's not. There's a lot of science that actually goes into it. And I don't think that the average homeowner understands that.
And you said there's like a psychological roller coaster. We've talked about that before, and it's pretty important to understand where the highs and where the lows are with our clients during the process. And I found it very interesting. You said that actually after the foundation is poured is kind of a low point.
It is, because
and it's because of the size or the perceived size.
It is kind of boring. You feel like this is going to be the moment where it feels like the house is coming together, but that's not really until you get to framing, I think. So
yeah, but there's so much fun that goes on as we're going to talk about, because quite frankly, it's such an important part of it. We know the finding the right lot and making sure that the foundation is of the best possible quality can make all the difference when it comes to the comfort, durability, health of the home, and those living in it. So, I think we need to turn that frown upside down, and people should understand that when they see their foundation in the ground, if their builder's taken a good job of mitigating water and managing pests and radon and everything else, that should be a fun part of building.
It's more than just concrete.
That's good. It's more than just concrete. Chris Pedigo, who's our Director of Construction, also Director of Sales, and he's, what do you call him?
He is our resident foundation and excavation guru.
He is good, isn't he? He actually is responsible for making sure that all of our foundations are put into the ground and meet the plans and the elevations, and then he works with our waterproofing contractors and everybody, and then he turns them over to our superintendents who take it from there. But that's how important this topic is. Right?
Right. We have one guy who understands that quality control and knows exactly what needs to be done. And I think there's something to be said about that.
And we're very fortunate because in our Utah market, we have another one in Dave Barton. He's our superintendent out there. It just so happens we tape our podcast in St. Louis. But we feel fortunate that we have two of the best in the business in both of our markets. So without further ado, here is our resident foundation and excavation guru, Chris Pedigo. Chris, I was surprised we were able to get you in from out of the field because you're always out and about at our job sites, overseeing quality control, making sure that everything is running on schedule, and helping the superintendent. So thank you for taking the time to come in. We really appreciate it.
Yes, sure. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we're going to be talking about a couple of different things because we're really focusing on the structure of the home this year. And as a high-performance builder, we really want to help our clients or the listeners at the same time understand, what we mean by high performance. So we're going to get down and dirty here. Pardon that pun a little bit. But so I think the first thing we want to talk about are lots. And quite frankly, you do a lot when it comes down to viewing of the lots and making sure that when a client is ready to buy a lot, they understand some of the pros and the cons of the build and that type of thing. And so that's exactly why we have you out of the field and into the studio, because we want to pick your brain today. And let's start talking about the importance of analyzing and analysis of a lot. What do you look for when you go out and help analyze a regular lot that's been undeveloped?
Right. When we're looking for an undeveloped property, we're looking specifically for a few things. One is available utilities, both the obvious ones like your water and your sewer and then something that some people don't think about is there high-speed internet available? If there's not, is that an issue for the client? Because I do have clients that work from home, especially with COVID, and high-speed streaming is important to some folks. We would look for, your general utilities. Is there going to be a well required? Is there going to be a septic required? Is electric to the lot? We've had a couple of lots over the past little bit where it was quite a ways to the nearest electric pole, and we had to bring electric down to the property. So all of those kind of things are from a utility standpoint, what we're looking for.
And let's just focus briefly on the sewer connection, because that is very important. If you don't have the proper fall, you either have to strap your plumbing, which I'll have you explain that in a minute, or you might have to look to a lift station in the basement. So how does that sewer and the elevation of the sewer main come into play?
Right, yeah, I mean, exactly that. And some of that comes into play is where the house is going to sit on the lot, or there may be a location on the lot where it will save you money to put the house in this location because you do have fall to the sewer. It's kind of a big picture thing. So you want to consider possible house locations, and if it's farther away from the road, does that increase the cost for driveways and for access? Does that increase your utility costs? Things like retaining walls come into play. So we really try to help a client have a really good overview of potential locations and potential costs associated, pros and cons. When you're comparing multiple lots, you compare those as a big picture for each lot, or on a particular piece of property, depending on the size, you may be determining the house location based on that.
This is the 6th year of our podcast, and every single season, we really talk to our clients about put your team together up front because there are so many benefits. This is one of those benefits where it really would help to have your builder be a part of the team and go out and walk the lot and analyze the lot with you, because we've talked about so many important items that the average person just would not know about. And another thing that comes into play too would be how heavily wooded or how many trees are on the lot, because it's not inexpensive if you're having to clear, let's say, an acre to make room for a house if it's heavily wooded. So that's another thing that has to be identified as far as, are those trees in the footprint of the new build? And if so, what's the clearing and what's the approximate cost of clearing?
Correct. That and municipalities, because certain municipalities, if you are taking down mature trees, you have to replace those trees with replacement foliage. So, that comes into play as well.
You want to also make sure that you have good coverage in case you're a deer hunter, right?
Correct, yeah. You want to make sure you leave tree stand trees in place, yes.
I'm actually giving you trouble because here in the St. Louis area, we build on some very heavily wooded large lots, and you kind of stake your claim to the homeowner that you're going to become their best friend because you want access to the property. So I give you trouble about that.
Absolutely, fringe benefit.
Another thing that's important too is kind of, if you think about the design of the house, some people want a very flat backyard so they can walk out of their main floor right to the backyard or a swimming pool or something out there. But there's others who would rather have a deck and possibly a lower level or a basement walkout.
Right.
And that's something that you really need to determine before you decide on a lot.
It really is, or at least consider. We have some extensive conversations when we're looking for property with a client about how they're going to use the outside spaces. What are you looking for? Are you looking for the view? Are you looking for privacy? Are you more concerned with a lot that does give you that main level backyard patio. Or there's a lot of our clients that finish that lower level. That's the recreation area, and they would really prefer to have outdoor living spaces off the lower level. That's one of those initial conversations we have so that when we are looking at lots, when we are walking properties, we can compare those and say, okay, this lot gives you these items that you're looking for, and this one gives you these, or you have to prioritize what you're looking for in the lot.
Let's talk a little bit about infill construction. We do a ton of infill here in the St. Louis area, where when we're building in Park City, most of that is just undeveloped lots like we've talked about. So when you get into infill construction, that brings on a couple of other challenges, doesn't it?
It does a lot, yeah. I mean, you're looking at several different factors there when you're considering either a tear down or an infill lot. But you're talking about utilities that, are they reusable, or are you doing new utilities anyway? And you start looking at access, you start looking at possibly a lot of times where with an undeveloped piece of land, maybe you have an easier access to where a lot of our teardowns, I mean, you have to be really cognizant about how much space do you have? How are you going to stockpile materials? How big a house will fit? What are setbacks? There's a lot of unforeseen hurdles that you can have with a teardown lot where, hey, maybe there's power lines that are coming across the street that are going to prevent you from getting a concrete pump in. Just when you've done a lot of teardown and rebuild, you're really looking at a lot for potential things that may be hurdles in the future build.
So that's basically where you have an older house on the site already that has to be demolished. That I like to use the word deconstructed because we try to do a responsible job of repurposing a lot of the materials on the inside, whether that's windows and doors or baseboards and possibly some of the utilities and that type of thing. But I don't think people realize that if you deconstruct a house, it's not as expensive as one would think, is it?
It's not bad. Once you do a little bit of that prep work and get some of that stuff that you are trying to reclaim out of it, then the actual deconstruction process is pretty quick and easy.
We found that in most cases you're looking at probably 15, maybe 20,000, and that would include, if there's asbestos that has to be mitigated, it includes the utilities that have to be properly disconnected and that type of thing. But as a general rule, if you think about cost over the entire budget, it's really not adding a lot, especially if it's an area that you like to live in. An interesting point to discuss briefly is one more expensive than another.
So much of that is area dependent and demand dependent, really. I mean, a lot of the houses where we are tearing down, they are very popular areas to be in, whether you're in the Kirkwood or the Webster or now University City or, some of those places, people are paying a premium for a lot just because of location. Farther out, the property may be less, but then you're going to have the tree clearing. So it's really, really dependent on the individual property and the size of the property and the location.
One of the things that we try to do is take into account that if we're building next to someone who's already living there, we really try to be good neighbors and make sure that we introduce ourselves to the neighbors and have them understand kind of what the process that we're going to be going through, who the contact person is, should they need anything. And the other thing that we do as builders, if you're building in existing neighborhoods, a lot of times you have curbs, you have sidewalks, you have retaining walls that are already in place. And many times you try to save those if possible. Generally, you can't save the driveway simply because the footprint of the house is going to grow or change. But a lot of the other hardscape you can try to save. So what we do is we photograph the area and try to have a record of it. So as we go back, if there's any damage that's done that we need to talk with our neighbors about or even the city about, for example, we at least have a record of what that is. And I think that's something that our team has gotten pretty used to doing. Let's move on to the foundation phase, if you will, because quite frankly, we've talked about it. The structure is more important than anything in the homes that we build. There's a couple of types of foundations. The main ones would be a full basement, which is very popular where we build in the Midwest, the Northeast, and quite frankly, even out in northern Utah. And then there's also crawl spaces. Let's start with that full basement. And when it comes to quality control, what do you look for on the plans, and how do you work with an architect to make sure the foundation is of the highest quality possible?
In general, our architects and our engineers are really good at making sure structurally that they're sound. There's some things that don't show up on typical architect's plans just from a waterproofing and a moisture management standpoint. Some architects pay more particular attention to that, but I think that's in conjunction with that foundation is the fact that you're taking into account having a dry basement when you're done. When you're talking about an in-grade basement, typically our architects these days are making sure that your foundation is got the proper rebar and the proper thickness and the structure there that it's going to be solid.
And that's changed over the years, though. The codes
absolutely.
are taking us in a direction that whatever we're building is much more safe and sound and solid simply
Yes.
because of, as I said, the changing codes, and the codes are being driven by just Mother Nature in many cases.
Yep. I mean, it's always good to err on the side of overbuilding, and I think we definitely do, which is a good thing. It's very, very rare that these days that you have a foundation issue if it's been properly designed and properly permitted and properly installed.
And one of the things that we tell our clients, too, is that lower level, or the basement, if you will, is very inexpensive space to finish as compared to anything above grade. So that's why we always encourage our clients, and I would encourage our listeners to consider maybe shrinking the footprint of your main house and considering finishing some of that lower level, because it's maybe a third of the cost of above grade, and it gives you so much more usable space for the family.
Correct. That's your key. And the key to do that is design that so it doesn't seem like your old-fashioned cellar. You know, you want that basement to seem open and have light and have space and not feel like you're underground. So, you know, we work hard on designs to make that basement feel like a part of the house and less like a basement.
In some parts of the country, basements aren't even an option. You do not have the proper soil conditions. I know that crawl spaces are something that are also somewhat popular because it's, in my mind, you have a little bit more control over utility runs and access for repairs and things like that. But if you do have a crawl space, you have to make sure that you're going to treat it properly as far as waterproofing and all, correct?
Yeah, you definitely, that space, because it is a lot of times just partially conditioned space or unconditioned space, you're really needing to make sure that you're following building science there and you're properly insulating and managing that moisture so that doesn't turn into a mildew or a mold area or a damp area under your house or problematic areas.
And that's something that I think our listeners and their architects and builders should pay close attention to, because it's not costly to finish it out and finish it properly. Just make sure that you do pay attention to it, because it can affect the overall performance of the house. One of the things that we've run into now a couple of times is actually having to pier our foundations. Talk about the conditions in which we find that that's usually necessary.
Right. So as we dig our foundations, I mean, you are going to run across soil conditions that don't carry a footing properly. We always use the services of a soil engineer in our processes. They're always going to come out and check, and they're going to tell you, yeah, this is great soil. Go ahead and start your footings as planned. There's a variety of things you can run into as you dig that hole that are going to require that you either... Sometimes it's as simple as upgrading the size of the footing or putting more steel in the footing. But as you said, piering, a lot of times if you hit soil, down in Clayton a while back, we hit a ravine, if you will. It was possibly an old creek bed or something that was underneath a house that had been torn down. We ended up with the soil engineer piering almost 20 feet before we got down to actual suitable soil. So when they do that, yeah, you basically go around, your engineer's going to design your footing and however many piers it needs and how they're spaced out, and then they're going to oversee that and make sure that you're piering down to either bedrock or suitable soil, and that the foundation and the footing itself is designed at that point to carry between those piers and support the house properly.
Should homeowners be scared of having to pier a foundation right off the bat?
No. 30 years ago, when we would just build on whatever soil you had, and that's why 30 years ago people's foundations cracked and people's footings were settling, and we live and learn as we build. I mean, no, that's why you bring that soil engineer in, and that's why we're piering down. If you do have unsuitable soil or you have expansive clay, or there's multiple soil issues that we can hit, but that's why you're using that engineer and you're designing that home to sit on that.
So you've mentioned the soil engineer a couple of times, and I want to make sure we hit that and hit it hard, because many areas around the country actually don't require permitting and inspections. If you're building in one of those areas, we still highly recommend hiring a soil engineer, which they're not overly expensive, usually just a few $100s, to come in and help you understand the conditions of the soil or on which you want to build your home, because this is one of the most important decisions, and a lot of times people will be like, well, I don't need an engineer. I'm going to skip that part of it. But I will contend that the engineer is probably one of the more important partners, if you will, in this project.
I would 100% agree. If there was any place I was going to save on building my new home, that would not be one of them. I mean, because even if you have a great excavator, Because what they're doing when they come in and your excavator digs that hole, your soil engineer is going to come in and they're going to drill a small hole down in different areas, and they're going to see what's below that. You can't tell. I mean, you could have really good soil, and 3 feet below that, 2 feet below that, there could be a big soft spot. There could be a big void. The last thing you want to do is build your brand new home on top of a spot that you're going to have a structural issue down the road because you saved a little bit of money on a soil engineer.
Yeah, so make sure no matter where you're building and no matter what your excavator might say, or quite frankly, even your builder, if you ask them if they have a soil engineer coming and they say no, overrule them, even if you have to pay for it out of pocket yourself, well worth it. I promised our listeners we were going to tell a couple of stories. So you've really had your fill, again, pardon the pun, of some of these issues, haven't you?
I have. And actually, both of these, which were major structural issues, had houses built over the top of them from way back when, and obviously both of these we were going to find with or without a soil engineer. But that goes to show you how we used to build. You don't know what's underneath the house. So, yeah, the home in Dogtown, I mean, we excavated that house, and when we got down to footing level, we started seeing a large circle of brick, if you will. And there was a large cistern underneath that had been filled in who knows when, back in the probably early 1900s, and then built on top of. And as we dug out, we ended up digging out almost 20 feet deep and probably 16 to 18 feet around of a brick wall cistern that they had to dig out, and we basically had to remediate that whole area. So it was all fill. We got to the bottom, and there was old 1800s medicine bottles down there and just things that had been thrown down there and then filled over, and that was literally 20 feet below the old house. So that was definitely an interesting find and a challenge to remediate. The solution there was to remove all of that old cistern. So we had to dig it down until we found the bottom and found good soil, which the engineer ran all that too. But remove all that brick, remove all of that fill, the trash out of the bottom. When we got down to where this hole ended up 16, some of it 18 feet deep, we found the bottom, we found good clean soil. And basically that one was as simple as clean rock fill all the way from there back up to our footing level. So many truckloads of rock, and we were back to square one. And then our project in Brentwood last year that we ended up uncovering a sinkhole in Brentwood underneath this existing home. That project itself ended up several weeks and quite a bit of excavation and many visits from the soil engineer, and some water excavation had to be done to remove the silt out of this sinkhole under the property. And that's, the piering comes into play there. That's your perfect example there. I mean, we ended up having to have our engineer design a whole different footing and foundation plan for this house to support the house over this area that was bad soil.
And you had to fill in, too, the void.
Correct,
with
Once we got to the bottom of that void, we had to basically fill in with large 3-foot rock up to a certain level, and this was all designed by the engineer as well. Cap that with a smaller rock, like a 8 to 10 inch rock, and then eventually we poured a 16-inch thick concrete cap over the top of the whole thing with rebar, and that was all tied into bedrock. And I mean, it came to where you could support a bridge on it when we got done. But that being said, it's one of those things where it's like you said, you don't know what kind of conditions you're going to get into when you start a teardown.
We actually had another story where there was an undeveloped lot that we did not know there was a home there before. And lo and behold, when we were excavating, we uncovered a home that they basically leveled and just covered up and left it there. So no telling what you find. Now, out in the Utah market, we run into a lot of different things. The main thing is rock. Mostly we're able to bring in a rock breaker. Rock breakers are about twice as much for the equipment, though, as the typical excavator. So, if you run into rock, depending upon how large the foundation, you could be looking at 10, 20,000, maybe even more if it's a large enough project of just hammering rock and hauling rock out. Another thing that is very common out there is some very steep lots. And just have to trust your builder. You have to trust your architect. And you have to trust the structural engineer that when they see the topography changes, when they see what you're trying to build, the size of the walls, that they are going to take care of you and make sure that they have included the right steel and the right locations and the width of the wall and things like that. So that's where it really becomes important to trust your team, right?
Yes, sir.
One thing, since we've been talking about all these potential issues when you're building. That's another reason that I know we talked about this when we had Tricia from Associated Bank and we were talking about the lending component. This is another reason you really want to consider having a contingency in your budget just for something like this. And I'll remind everybody, just because it's in the budget, that doesn't mean you're going to spend it. If you don't run into these problems, you'll never finance the money, and it's like it was never in the budget, but at least you're approved up front in case something like this happens. So let's talk about the actual foundation itself, because I know that one of the things that you, as our Director of Construction and Quality Control Manager, are very concerned about, it's managing water in and around the foundation.
Correct.
Obviously, when a soil engineer comes out and the soil engineer gives you the A-OK to build on virgin soil, you feel comfortable doing that. I'm a firm believer that if you have a little bit of extra money in your budget, you might want to consider a little bit of an overdig and backfill with some crushed gravel that you put your footings on. Talk about the reasoning behind that.
Yeah, I mean, that clean rock, it just allows a place for water to move. We always have a sump system. You always either have that or a daylight system where water can drain. So if you do have room for that crushed gravel rather than just dirt pack underneath your footings, it gives you that area for water to be able to transfer and move freely and actually be mitigated instead of sitting around basically trapped in dirt.
And if we run into unfavorable soil conditions, a lot of times the engineers require 2 feet of crushed gravel. If you don't run into it, do you think 6 inches is enough, a foot, or somewhere in that area?
Yeah, just enough to give you some decent room for water to flow.
And another thing it allows you to do is if you happen to run into a rainy or snowy period while you're building, your foundation crew can work because they're on top of crushed gravel. They're not down in them. They don't come out of the hole looking like Pigpen because they're working on crushed gravel, which keeps them clean and keeps them moving along.
Keeps them happy, yes, sir.
Keeps them happy. And we're not talking about a big expense either. Depending upon the size of the layout, you might be adding $3,000-$4,000. If it's a really large home, you could be adding, $8,000 to $10,000. But again, keep in mind, whatever that budget is, it could be well worth it to have the peace of mind to know you're building your home the best possible way. And that's why we always talk about potential clients about, do you want to consider building on top of some gravel, even if we get down to grade and find some plastic soil and that type of thing. Let's continue to talk about water management. You do something that's very unusual. I don't care what market you live in. It's very unusual. Very few builders are actually applying a waterproofing agent to the top of the footings. And you also make the foundation crew pull off for a day.
I do.
Which again, builders are probably rolling over right now thinking, you do? You have them on site and you tell them to stay away? Talk about the importance of that capillary break.
Yeah, they're patient with me. I think that's a very important thing in keeping a basement free of extra humidity. Concrete, like any stone, wood, is going to absorb moisture from the ground. So you have your footing sitting in the ground, whether you have rock down there, whether you're sitting right on the dirt, whatever the case, that concrete's going to absorb that moisture out of the ground. And if you don't waterproof the top of your footing with some sort of capillary break, that moisture is going to come up into your foundation. 100% guaranteed it will. We waterproof the outside of the foundation to keep that moisture from the dirt from coming through your wall. So if you don't stop that moisture and it's in your foundation wall, the only place that moisture can dry is into your basement. So as you talked about earlier, we do a lot of finished basements and finished lower levels, so we're finishing those walls. So if you're absorbing that moisture and then it's exhausting into your house, that's just putting extra humidity and extra chance for mold or mildew or moisture in that basement behind your wall system. Even if the basement's unfinished, that's still creating that humidity inside the house that we don't want.
So what if you're someone who's going to be building a home and you've listened to the podcast, you have your design done, your builder's about to start on the foundation, and you go to him and say, hey, I heard on a podcast that you really need to, give me a capillary break on top of my footings. And the builder looks at you and says, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. What do you tell that homeowner to tell the builder?
I would just tell them to look at a little research. Bring your own research to the game and show them. It's out there for you to read. Look on the internet. There's multiple ways to do a capillary break. So then the reason why I pull my foundation crew off is I prefer to actually seal the footing with a waterproofing agent. And I did a lot of research to find one that's okay with green concrete. You have to find one that'll work under grade because a lot of concrete waterproofing are only for above grade applications. And so they do make some different capillary breaks that basically you just lay down and you build your footing on top of it. It's a membrane product that you can lay down. I prefer to get in there and actually roll on a waterproofing system only because I feel like I get sealed better around the rebar that comes through the footings and things like that, and it actually does a better job. And for me, it's more convenient. We've tried to work with the membranes before, and their foundation crews are not thrilled with that idea, and they get bunchy. And if I feel like you have the opportunity for there to be breaks and in that. So I prefer to paint it on. But I would just tell a homeowner to take a little bit of research to your builder and show them the reason why, because it's one of those things where there's a few things when we build our houses that are things that I would never give on. And the soil engineer is one, this capillary break is one. There's a few things when you get to the insulation and performance and things that are also things that I wouldn't give. But that capillary break would be one that I would insist on.
So let's talk about the foundation is finally poured, it's stripped, you're getting ready for waterproofing. I know that we always look for lifetime waterproofing options for our clients because truly are talking about a few $1,000 difference is it between the lowest price application versus an application which does come with a lifetime warranty. So spend a little bit extra on that waterproofing agent that goes on the outside of the foundation.
Yeah, I would say that. Upgrade that and do a really good quality waterproofing. Some of that comes into account there too when we're weighing the options, and is it necessary to do the most expensive one, or is the next one down that's a lifetime warranty good? Take a look at if it's an in-grade. Take a look at the area it is. Is there a lot of moisture in there? Is this a really dry area anyway? And really make an educated decision on whether you really need the very, very top of the line or if the next one down that's still a lifetime warranty is good enough. One of the other things that we do on all of our houses is, and I would really recommend, is on that exterior waterproofing. So typically you do your black waterproofing up to wherever your expected grade is. A little while back, we started bringing our waterproofing all the way to the top of the foundation. And we basically use the black waterproofing product up to grade, where we expect the grade. And we do a concrete colored waterproofing from there up. And what that gives you is protection from cracks that start above grade. A lot of times folks, once they move into their houses, grade will come up on the house. They'll build flower beds or they'll do landscaping. And all of a sudden you've got soil that's up above your black waterproofing level. Well, if you get a crack that starts above grade there, that's a pretty quick, easy access for water to get inside your house. There are a lot of water guide systems that basically on the interior, they sit on top of your footing and they catch water there on top of your footing and redirect them around the perimeter to a drain tile. I do not use that on our homes. I go to the old school sock and perforated pipe that sits below the footing. The reason I do that is because we work hard to do that capillary break on top of that footing. And the last thing I want is my basement moisture coming all the way up on top of the footing and getting above that capillary break before it gets into that water guide system. So I like to capture that interior water down below footing level with a lower pipe instead of that water guide system that's so popular now.
And so you're talking about waterproofing on the inside of the footing, and I know that waterproofing on the exterior of the footing is also crucial. I know a lot of production builders, simply because of budgets and costs and all, choose to do the exterior only, but not the interior. You're a big proponent of doing both.
Yeah, we do both on all our houses. We'll bring that, on an in-grade house, we'll bring that exterior drain tile pipe in and back into our sump pump and then pump it out. If it's a walkout house, we'll take that water and we'll daylight that. So it basically gives you two opportunities to capture that water, and it keeps you from relying on one system to catch everything inside or outside.
Let's talk a little bit about backfill, because here's where you have a couple of choices too. Number one is, if you're going to backfill with dirt, make sure that it's not expansive, make sure it's not clay, make sure it's appropriate, because you don't want it to swell and put pressure on your foundation. There are some who have more of an unlimited budget who would prefer to backfill at least half of the way with crushed rock. I would agree with them, but it can bust the budget pretty quickly, can't it?
It can, yeah. And, it's still a good idea on places where settling may be an issue, like a structural issue. So if you've got areas where you have a sidewalk or a patio above or something like that, then it's 100% a great idea to go ahead and fill with clean gravel there, so you don't have any settling under those areas that are going to be future walkways or concrete that's going to have issues with that settling issue. That being said, our drain tile products and our moisture management products are so good. And as long as you're, like you said, it needs to be good, clean soil. You need to keep an eye on what you're using, but you can do a substantially very good job of backfill without that much rock.
And since we're talking about water management, let's make sure that if you do have any window wells, make sure your waterproofing contractor also installs some of the drain tile to allow water that would build up in those window wells, right?
Correct. Yeah, you need that drain to go either to your daylight system or to your sump pit. Yep.
Yeah, and just make sure on your final grade, too, that you have fall away from the house, because a lot of times people don't realize that, man, if you don't have the proper fall, water can back up against the foundation, and no matter how diligent you were during construction, it can eventually lead to problems. There are different types of foundations out there, one of which is becoming more and more common, it's an ICF, which stands for insulated concrete form. And basically you have a sandwich. You have insulation on the outside, on both sides, and then you pour concrete in the middle where you have your steel for the structure. So ICFs are a good idea, obviously more expensive than pouring a regular foundation.
It is a very efficient method. It's a very dry, very warm foundation. So it's definitely got its benefits. It definitely comes with its costs. A lot of that depends on when we design a house and we talk about where our priorities are. A lot of that comes down to what's your priority for your budget. And I'm going to say most people, especially here in the St. Louis area where we build here, I don't know that level of performance is necessarily high on people's list. And I think you can get a very adequate level of performance out of a concrete foundation and save a few dollars from the budget. But it is a very great product.
There's another product out there called Superior Walls. Superior Walls are actually poured in a factory. They're delivered to the job site. They're assembled on site like a panel, if you will. And that's another successful product that's been out there. I've seen Superior Homes. I think that it's an interesting product and something that some of our listeners might want to look into. But again, I always refer to talk to your team, talk to the architect, talk to the builder. Find out what makes the most sense for you. Finally, let's talk a little bit about pests and radon, how we handle both, because we'll start with the pests if we can. This is the time to really take care of termites. So and it's a very simple, inexpensive process.
Yep. You always want to termite treat your interior surfaces, like under your interior concretes, before you pour. Want to wait until after the house is dried in and you're done getting any possible water in that basement from rains and stuff. So after the house is dried in, after your plumber's done digging up the basement floor and everything's regraded, we typically do that the last thing before we pour our concrete. We'll come in there and get everything graded out nice, termite treat that basement floor, and that pretty much is a lifetime fix for that.
And then let's talk about radon, something that's on more and more people's radar. Both markets in which we build, St. Louis, northern Utah, it's becoming very common. Actually, it's something that we just do as standard, is install a passive radon system that we can make an active system should we need to. Explain that to our listeners.
Right. So you want to capture that radon. You want to put a system in the floor that's got basically perforated pipe where that radon has a way to escape from out from under the floor without finding cracks around your house. So you make the path of least resistance for the radon, if you will. It is important, if you're going to put a radon system in, that you make sure your builder is using a sealed sump pump system, because if your sump pit is not sealed, then that radon system is not very efficient and really doesn't do its job. You do radon testing down the road, and if you do have high levels of radon in the basement, or if it's necessary, then you can add a pump that actually creates negative pressure, and it will actually suck that radon out of from under the floor and pump that radon out.
Oh man, it's so much less expensive than doing it after the fact.
Correct.
And it looks so much better than doing it after the fact, because, if you ever drive down the street and sometimes you see those radon mitigation pipes running up the side of the house, you know exactly what's going on. So to have the chance to do it during construction, conceal it in the walls, run it up and out the attic, really the best way to do it.
Yep.
Chris, you've been absolutely fantastic. Thank you for your time. I'm going to let you go because I know that you're going to run into the field trying to put out a fire out there somewhere, which you're really good at. But seriously, thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure.
You bet.
Melody, it's always fun having Chris on the podcast with us. Great information, presents it exceptionally well, and I think he does so in a way that it's understandable to our listeners.
And he's a building science geek.
Yes, he
in
is.
A hunter's facade.
And hunting and fishing
And
facade.
fishing, yes.
So no, we were very happy. What do we have coming up in show notes?
So we're going to put some videos and photos together from those projects that we discussed, just so people can kind of see. I'm going to also put a picture of a foundation next to a finished home, so you can kind of really see where our clients are looking at when they're like, oh, this, what? I'll put some resources up there. And then if you guys have any questions or want to reach out to us, you can email us at podcast@hibbshomes.com and leave us a review.
Thank you to our listeners. We truly appreciate each and every one of you, and we hope you join us again for our next episode of The Art of Custom.
For more information, visit www.artofcustompodcast.com or find us on Facebook and LinkedIn as The Art of Custom. Be sure to subscribe to get the latest episodes, and please rate and review. The Art of Custom is produced by Hug Monster Sound with original music by Adam Frickfordine. Thanks for listening.